short. And the information that we got out of it was just extraordinary. One of the things I've actually been struggling with, and I spoke to you yesterday about the 4 ideas in creating a roadmap, was I've been in the industry for 20 years. And it occurred to me after a conversation with Mike Acton, actually the very first time Mike and I spoke, he crystallized something for me. Because for a very long time, we've been able to predict with a degree of confidence what was going to happen. We could tell you 5, 10 years from now what was going to be next, what technology was going to do, how the industry was going to trend. We knew. Once you had that experience in the industry, we knew. Today, we can't do that. Like, we have no idea where this industry will be in 10 years because technology is evolving so quickly. And it leaves a bit of a loss because we are the industry that's driving it. It's our job to get us there, and everybody else is going to follow us. So which is not blinding, right? But we adapt. We adapt to change. Mike actually said that in his talk yesterday, that we are the agents of change. We do it very, very quickly. And there's one company that tracks these trends better than anybody else in the world. They are extraordinarily good at what they do. Their database is the most sophisticated in the world. And whenever I need advice and good guidance on where I think things are going and confirmation of that, these are the guys I call. So Jesse is going to talk to you about EEDAR and probably fill you with more facts than you'd care to know at this time of the morning. But anyway, make you very welcome, Vice President of EEDAR, Jesse Divnich.
So here today, I'm here to talk today about brands, the power of brands, how brands are created, and more importantly, how you guys as independent developers can use this process to create powerful brands. And one of the things is the presentation switching over here. And when I look at the independent community here in Australia, I think it's great. I mean, it's a gold rush, right? It's like a jump ball. Everything's been reset. You guys have kind of escaped the grasp of big publishers. But the unfortunate truth is that when we look at industries, we look at entertainment, we eventually see that brands ultimately dominate entertainment. And this idea that you can escape publishers, while that's great in the short term, and I'm sure you guys are enjoying that right now, you do need to understand that probably long term, the industry is going to return back to normal, where publishers are once again going to dominate the industry. And it's for an important reason. It's because of brands. And when I was going through this presentation, I kind of said to myself, I said, this really has not a lot to do about video games. It has a lot to do with entertainment, right? Stop building movies, right? Start making brands. Stop making music. Start building brands. And really stop building anything and start building brands. And I hope throughout this presentation you kind of get the idea that brands dominate entertainment. And if you're not creating brands, you're eventually going to die out. You're eventually going to become extinct because these emerging markets that we operate in today, like the social markets, the free-to-play, the mobile, they're great for independent developers, but you need to understand that eventually those markets are going to be dominated by brands. So just a quick introduction. This is on a sales pitch. I work for a company called EEDAR. I think Tony did a great job introducing EEDAR. We do a lot of great things. Right now we work with pretty much the top 20 publishers in the industry. things like sales forecasting, mock reviews, capital research, investments. We strictly just focus on video games. If it's video games related, we work on it. In terms of myself, I've been in this industry now for a little over 10 years. I got to update that. I'm a pretty young guy, so I got started early. And I've just been working on the investment side, and I just found that over the last 9 years, working with investors, working as an analyst, forecasting sales, trying to predict trends, after a while you kind of hit that 10,000 hours where you just kind of get to that master point, and you really, everything just starts to click together. And I guess that's why, you know, I'm widely and wildly quoted in the press often. So why should you care about this presentation? First, brands dominate entertainment. Right? Video games do not make money. That's kind of a broad and an absolute term. Some video games do make money, but for the most part, video games do make money. Brands make money. And the first thing we need to understand is that publishers are not in the video game business. They're in the entertainment business. And that's why games like Call of Duty, right? Is Call of Duty 100 times better than any average game? Of course not. But it sells 100 times more, and the reason why is because of brands. So let's talk first about what is a brand. Let's just get started off with that, right? A brand is an identity, right? It's when you call something by other than what it is. And here's an example. I asked my wife a couple weeks ago to go out walking, and I said, hey, go put on your boots. And she goes, those aren't my boots, those are my Uggs. Now still today, I have no clue what Uggs are. I just know they're very expensive, and they're a brand. And are they Australian? Oh, wow, there you go. Well, they're very expensive. And when someone asks me what I'm doing, I don't say I'm playing video games, I say I'm playing Call of Duty. And in the most extreme example, if I'm playing a game with a friend and he asks me, how do you do that move? I don't say down, forward, half circle, forward, A. I say, just do where I use Fireball, right? The Hadouken. And it's an extreme example, but still part of the brand. On the plane here, they said, please turn off and stow all portable electronics. And they said that includes iPhones, iPads, and Kindles. They didn't say mobile phones, tablets, or e-readers. They call it by what it is. And it's for the same reason why I hate headlines like this. I get quoted a lot in the press, and I hate to see headlines like this. But I love headlines like this. Right? Don't call me by what I do. Call me by who I am. So to understand kind of what a brand is, you have to kind of distinguish between what is an intellectual property and what is a brand. First, Just Dance, very popular game. That's a new intellectual property. It's new in the series, it's never been done before. Just Dance 2. Well, that's an existing intellectual property because Just Dance has already been created. A non-branded game would be like Patapon, right? There's no brands associated with it whatsoever. It's a new intellectual property. And again, this is kind of the extreme example, but Just Dance is actually a branded game. Why? Because if you look at the cover, it says Katy Perry, Rihanna, Michael Jackson. It's branded. But for the most part, and the way I want you to think about brands is really about existing intellectual properties. Those are really truly what brands are. And when we start to think about the rest of our industry, brands really surround us, right? In the top left corner there is Vice City. It's not just a city. If I say Vice City, you guys instantly know what that is. The Mushroom Kingdom, right? The Mushroom Kingdom is just not some universal world, it's the Mushroom Kingdom. That's where Mario and Princess and Luigi live. Now, it wouldn't be a presentation with an analyst if I didn't drop some stats on you, right? So we looked at the top 50 selling games for last year. And we found that 94% of the top 50 selling games were branded in some fashion, right? Battlefield, Call of Duty, Halo, Gears of War. Those are brands now. And of course, as you can imagine, a presentation about brands wouldn't be anything without a brand to graph. So I said, let's look at other markets. Well, if you look at XBLA, we find that the top 62%, a little bit smaller, in 2010, of the top 50 were branded titles. So it's beginning to expand a little bit more. I see some people actually taking pictures. Just so you know, at the end of this presentation, I'll give you a link so where you can actually request a download for this. So feel free to take pictures, but know that anybody in here can request the presentation and I'll give it to you. So I thought this was interesting, right? It is something that goes against a trend. So I said, let's look at a newer market, an emerging market, the iPhone. In 2010, only 22% of the top selling games on the iPhone were branded. So an example would be like Angry Birds. Angry Bird, now it's kind of become a brand, but the Angry Birds game is really non-branded. It's first in the series, it's never been done before. And I think that's interesting. And of course there's, I guess, Evil Pac-Man, I get points for that. So I plot this on a graph, and I asked myself, I mean, that's what I like to do. I see data, I have to put it on a graph. And I asked myself, is there a correlation here? Is it a pricing correlation? Maybe it's the cheaper a product is, the more likely we as consumers are going to open ourselves up to new experiences. Like, we don't mind spending 99 cents on a new intellectual property. It's 99 cents. We'll try it out. And I said, you know what, I think I might be onto something. But then maybe it's cycle-driven. Maybe the more mature a cycle is, the more it gravitates towards brands. The consumers gravitate towards brands. Right? The 7th generation started in 2006. It's, well, the 7th generation. And it's dominated by brands. Digital console games really didn't start becoming popular until 2008, and it's only about 62%. And then Facebook and iOS really didn't start becoming popular in 2009, and we see that they're less dominated by brands. So I wanted to test this. So I said, okay, let's just pick one market. Let's just take the iOS market. And I looked at September 2010. Of the top 50 selling games, only 20% were branded. Then I looked at today. The top from September 11, 40% of the top selling iOS games are brands, right? Not Angry Birds, I still consider non-branded because it's the first in the series. But what about Angry Birds Rio, right? Puss in Boots, Fruit Ninja's Puss in Boots. I think right now in America, the top selling game is Zombieville USA. Not one, but two. And I think this brings up an interesting point that as markets mature, and it's a little bit early to come to this conclusion, but as an analyst, I feel like I can make this conclusion, is that as markets mature, they eventually become dominated by brands. And if you're not out there creating brands now, what's going to happen is that 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, we're going to find that these emerging markets we love so much now that are supporting our independent community are eventually going to be dominated by brands. So if you're not creating brands, you're eventually going to become extinct. Really, no matter how you look at it, right? And I've looked at music and movies and video games. Eventually, all entertainment, as they mature, are dominated by brands. And before I always give a presentation, I always kind of test run through my associates. And one of my associates said, "Jesse, no, that's not right. Look at movies, right? Look at Titanic, When Harry Met Sally, and Avatar. Those aren't brands, and those are extremely successful." Well, not really. First of all, Titanic is a brand, right? I tell my associates, I said, what if we just replace the word Titanic? What if the title of the thing was just called A Big Ass Boat That Sank? That was the name of the title. Would it have sold as many units? And it probably wouldn't have. And of course, it starred Leonardo DiCaprio. As much as I dislike him as an actor, he's still a brand, right? And that's what helped propel sales. Harry Met Sally, you got Meg Ryan and Billy Crystal. Those are brands. Now, Avatar is something I had to think about and actually pushed me farther and helped actually prove what I'm talking about today. Avatar was done by James Cameron. Yes, it's a new intellectual property, new brand, but right there on the box, right there on the top of the box, it says from the director of Titanic. Of course, he made Titanic. And then, of course, they used 3D, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit, about how new technologies can actually propel and create new brands. But understand that across all entertainment, eventually they become dominated by brands. So I'm at the point in the presentation where I think a lot of people like to take notes, because I want to go through a couple of steps in terms of how brands get created. First, you have, when you release a game, you have what I call, you set a consumer promise, right? And when you release a game to a consumer, you are setting a promise on an established level of quality. When someone plays your game, you're telling them that going forward, this is what you should expect from us. A good example is Call of Duty. They set out a goal to be the premier first-person online shooter. That was their goal. That was their promise. And what's important to understand here is that this is a relative, it's not an absolute promise, it's a relative promise. Meaning that as the markets evolve, what it takes to become a premier first-person online shooter yesterday is not the same as it is today. Now, when it comes to consumer promise, there's things that I want to break that consumer promise you set. Things like competition, right? So Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out. And everyone else tried to copy that and expand on that. Homefront, and your Battlefields, and your Halos, and your Gears of War. You have things like your future releases that can potentially break that promise. And feature ceilings, which is an incredibly important concept to understand. And I'm going to talk about feature ceilings in a bit. There are, of course, things that are really trying to help your consumer promise. Things like your previous releases. The community, which really is the vocal minority. They're very vocal, but they are the minority. And of course, demand for your product. And we think about, back to the example of Call of Duty, look at everything that's come out since then. They're trying to break that consumer promise. So it's a very important concept to understand. Next is presence. Just the idea of just being everywhere. And no one does this better than Angry Birds. A 99-cent ad. Like, they make only $1 per sale, and yet they seem to be everywhere. Right? There's costumes, there's plush dolls, there's even a movie. When the movie came out, I was in an airport, and some kid was tugging on his mom's arm and kept on saying, I want to go see the Angry Birds movie. It's like, that's not what it is. It's Rio. Like, Rio, the movie, was developed well before Angry Birds was in existence. But people associated that movie with Angry Birds. It was the Angry Birds movie. Now, as independent developers, you don't necessarily have the resources that a lot of the big guys have. But there are certain things you can do. Right? Things like developer interviews, attending conferences like these and networking with people, that helps. Engaging your community. I think every independent developer, no matter how small you are, you should have a community that you can use as a sounding board. And no one does this better than two people, two great friends, Ted Price and Dennis Diamond. I mean, Ted Price works for Insomniac, and he's out there constantly. He is literally at every conference. He's constantly talking to the media, providing his insights. He just seems to be everywhere. And because he's able to build that awareness, build up the brand for Insomniac, he is able to do things that no one else can do, like retain top talent, like our very own Mike Acton. And of course, to prove the point, I actually looked at all of Insomniac games, and I said, I took all their games and I find all their comparables. Games that had similar marketing spend, similar quality, and a similar genre. And we find that Insomniac games, on average, sell about 30 to 40% more than your average comparable game. Why? Because it's Insomniac. Because Ted's out there, Mike's out there, building awareness for their brand. I think Dennis Diamond is even a greater example. I mean, what has Silicon Knights really done in the last 10 years? I think they made one game, Two Humans, which was kind of a dud. But nonetheless, he's out there all the time talking to the community, engaging the community. Now, for those who play Two Human, I think we can all understand that it wasn't the best game out there. But if you actually compare Two Human to other games in similar categories, genres, and marketing spend and review scores, Two Human actually sold 40% more than the average game. Why? Because of Silicon Knights, the brand Silicon Knights. Next is responsiveness. It's another important term. It's the ability to just adapt your games to consumer and behavioral demands. You need to understand that what consumers want today is not what they're going to want tomorrow. And when you start establishing your brands, making your brands, you need to understand that you have to evolve. You can't keep creating the same game. And the best example I like to use is Resident Evil, probably one of my favorite games. Now, when Resident Evil came out, it was a very methodical game, right? It was very patient, and you had to collect key cards and mix herbs, and maybe every once in a while they threw a zombie at you. And that was great for the time. But as the market began to demand more, and the demographics began to broaden and become more mainstream, consumers wanted more. They wanted more zombies. And that's exactly what they did, right? As each game went by, they just kept throwing more zombies at you. And eventually now, with Resident Evil 5, it's just zombies coming at you just 24/7. And that's a great example of responsiveness. Just the ability to understand that what consumers want today is not the same as they do tomorrow. And a good example I use is the Silent Hill series. Back in the day, Silent Hill and Resident Evil kind of went hand in hand. Like, they were competing with each other. And Capcom understood that consumers wanted more. And they kept evolving their title, making it more mainstream, making it more, adding those instant gratifications. Whereas kind of Silent Hill stuck to the same formula. And of course, as we know today, Resident Evil now sells significantly more than Resident Evil because they were able to respond to these changes and demands of their consumers. Which brings me to the the point of feature ceilings, which again is a very, very important point to understand. Basically what a feature ceiling is when you reach some type of limitation, basically where you're not able to do, you basically reach a point where you just simply can't do anything more. Everything you can think of doing, you've done. And it's either because of some genre limitation or some technology limitation. A good example is Tony Hawk, one of my favorite series. I don't know if skateboarding is a sport down here, but it certainly is here. Okay, it is? Okay, great. So when Tony Hawk first came out, it was what was it? It was the first great 3D skateboarding game. And reviews were high. And of course, consumers wanted more. They kept wanting more, and they delivered that, right? They didn't reach a limitation in the genre. But they did get to a point, and it was right around Underground 2, that you literally could do everything you could think about doing in a skateboarding game. You can get off your skateboard, you can create, park, play on ride, play online, create skaters. You could do everything. And you would think that consumers, as we're all consumers, you'd think that we're very rational, and we would say, oh, we understand Activision, and that you can't innovate anymore because we've done everything. We're still going to keep buying your title. Of course, that's not what happened. Review scores eventually decline. And it's right around Underground 2, where they reached that feature ceiling, that sales began to decline. Now, it's not that Tony Hawk Proving Ground, which in my opinion is the last great Tony Hawk game. I don't count that little skateboard thing they did as an actual game. But that game, the Proving Ground, is not any less of a game than its predecessors. It's actually better. It's actually the best in the series. The graphics were better, you could do more stuff, but it wasn't enough. You wanted more. And it's an important concept as independent developers when we're building our brands and building our games, we need to understand, is that you're not necessarily making a game. When you're making a game now, you have to think about what about the next iteration? What about 2 years from now, 3 years from now? What am I going to do to continue to innovate? And when am I going to hit that ceiling? That's an important factor, because once you know when you're going to hit that ceiling, and there's nothing out there helping you drive stuff like new technology, then you need to understand that, okay, things are going to begin to slow down. I think the common mistake we see right now among big publishers, these big multi-billion-dollar publishers who have infinite amount of data, they for some reason think that they just continue to sell and grow, but that's not the case. Eventually you do hit ceilings. So originality, I don't really consider originality a big part of creating a brand, but it's in there. I think that it does play a minor role. No one does this better than Fifth Cell. Fifth Cell, Jeremiah's CEO, is a great friend. He came up with a term that I love to use, which was marketable innovations. He wants to do things that are marketable, right? Stuff that sells. We all want to sell. We all want to make money. But he also realized that we need to innovate. And of course, they're the company that did Scribblenauts. That's a marketable innovation. It was one of the top-selling Nintendo DS games, and now, today, one of the top-selling iPhone and iPad games. It's amazing. But of course, when I say originality is not all that important, I always have to bring up Zynga, who, I apologize if anybody from here is from Zynga, but they don't have an original bone in their body. Everything they've done is essentially copied somebody else. But that's fine. The one thing that Zynga did understand was that the social market was hitting a tipping point. And if you ask someone who's a regular player of Farmville, someone who's not us, the core community, they will actually think that Farmville's an original game. But it's not. And that's why I say that sometimes originality is not necessarily a big and important factor to building a brand. You got to be relatable. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes I think independent developers make, is that they want to make a game for themselves. And that's fine, but you need to understand that if you want to become commercially successful, you have to create something that's relatable to your audience. This right here, a monster. It's a beautiful monster. I'm sure took somebody weeks, if not months, to build, but that's not relatable. Yes, there is a small percentage of the market that probably wants to play that or beat that or do something with it, but it's not relatable. You're only talking about the people that want to do something with this is very, very small, maybe 10%, 20% of the market. That's not a monster. That's a monster. Relatable. You have to be relatable. And you don't necessarily have to be. If you want to target that small niche market, then that's fine. Create things like this. But if you want to really hit the mainstream and grow your brand into something that is like an Angry Birds, it has to be like Angry Birds. Like the birds have they look like humans, right? They put eyeballs and mouths on them. They make it relatable. Reach. It's very important in brands to have reach. As independent developers, you might not necessarily experience this for some time, but if you do have a successful brand, reach is important. And a good example I use is Nike, right? Nike started out making shoes. That's what they did. They made shoes. But where are they today? They're everywhere. They're not in the shoe business, right? They're in the sports business. That's reach. And we see that even in our own industry. Angry Birds. With Angry Birds, the movie, or Rio, right? Fruit Ninja, Puss in Boots. That's reach. Guitar Hero turned into DJ Hero. Now, of course, DJ Hero is a pretty well-known industry flop. But again, if you look at the metrics, you look at the data, you find that the DJ Hero game sold about 50 to 60% more than any other game without the Hero brand. Reach. And we start thinking about reach. Who in our industry has the biggest reach? Well, it's Mario. I mean, he's done everything, right? He's been a doctor, he's done RPGs, race car driving, golf, baseball, fighting. He even took up dancing for a little bit. I mean, that's reach. And of course, it's not just games. That's the beauty of it, right? There's plush dolls, and there's toys, and there's shirts, and there's even a movie. Which is that? It sucked as a movie? I'm sorry, you're wrong. I still watch that movie today. It's a great movie. You actually know I'm trying to think of the movie with Scott Pilgrim versus the World. You know, new Super Mario Brother movie actually sold more than Scott Pilgrim, which is quite interesting. Just an interesting stat for you guys. Next is recognition. Just being able to identify, for a consumer to look at a logo and identify exactly what you're trying to do or who you are. I think Coca-Cola is a great example. I didn't have time to do this when I was good with Photoshop, but I probably could have rearranged the letters, right, to say like Coca-Cola. You guys probably wouldn't even notice. It's about taking your identity and everything that you built and applying it to a logo. Like, for example, Rockstar, right? When we see Rockstar, we instantly think high-quality entertainment. But that's not necessarily always important, and there's some good examples like Rovio. Like your average consumer who loves Angry Birds has no clue of who or what Rovio is, and that's fine, because Rovio wants to promote Angry Birds, not Rovio. Take-Two, great example. Like people often forget that Take-Two owns Rockstar. Take-Two actually owns Grand Theft Auto. If the Rockstar team disbanded and went on and started their own development studio, they would not have access to Grand Theft Auto. But Take-Two understands that the Rockstar name is important. It's a brand, it's an image, it's an identity. And that when people see it, they instantly think high-quality entertainment. And that's why Take-Two doesn't really promote their logo. Infinity Ward is a great example. You know, last year, or a year and a half ago, when the whole Infinity Ward situation happened, I think most of us in this room as core gamers were like, that's it, we're never buying Call of Duty ever again, and the whole series is just going to fail. But what people forgot is that of the 30 million people that buy Call of Duty each year, maybe only 1 million knew what Infinity Ward was. The other 29 million couldn't care less. They cared about Call of Duty. And that's why Call of Duty continues to sell what it does, despite the fact that the main members of the team have disbanded. Again, you got to be consistent, right? And that's one thing that Rockstar does really well. You have to be consistent. You have to maintain and build that consumer promise. And again, Rockstar does it no better than anybody else. Or they do it better than everybody else. So when you look at Rockstar and their lineup, I mean, what they do is they just create high-quality games. Yeah, they've had a few duds here and there, but for the most part, they create high-quality games. And when someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, Jesse, did you hear about the new Ubisoft game?" I'm like, well, what is it? Is it Assassin's Creed or a Shaun White or Rayman? Like, just tell me what it is. But when they say, "Hey, did you hear about the new Rockstar game?" I mean, I instantly just start salivating because I want to know what it is. Why? Because they built up that consistency. Sometimes it's not about quality when it comes to consistency. Ubisoft does this great. Their Imagine series, which I think has sold well over 8 million units worldwide, is a perfect example of consistency, not from a quality perspective, but actually just from an image perspective, a box perspective. They understood that their core consumer, the people buying Imagine series, were not the people that are going to Kotaku's or GameSpots or IGN's. They were just walking in the store and picking a game based off of what the box looked like. And even though all of these games here, if you actually had a chance to play these, if you have, you probably wouldn't admit to it, but as EEDAR, we have to research these games. Each one of these games are completely different from the other. Like there's different menus, different styles, but the box is consistent. So that when someone goes out and buys teacher class trip, and they want to go out and become a master chef, they'll likely gravitate towards the Ubisoft title. Consistency. And the way I explain this better is kind of looking at like a piggy bank of brand equity. If I'm new to this industry, I've never played any game before, and I pick up Assassin's Creed, I'm thinking, wow, this is a great game. Who made this? Ubisoft. Okay, again, I've never experienced anything before. So to me, in the brand equity bank, Ubisoft gets +1. Then they come out and release Shaun White. And again, I've only played one Ubisoft game and it was a great experience. So I think, well, then that must translate to this over here. And it doesn't. And that's why publishers like Activision, EA, Ubisoft, THQ, although they're great clients and they do a phenomenal job, when we hear, again, when I say, did you hear about the new Ubisoft title, you just have to ask yourself, is it an Imagine title? Is it Shaun White? You know, what is it? But Rockstar does it differently, right? They just constantly tend to build up that brand equity. And that's why, even though they can release a couple of flops, right? I thought L.A. Noire was a great game, but it certainly didn't live up to expectations. Maybe there it's a -1, but they still have that positive brand equity. It's all about that consistency. You do got to differentiate. Differentiation is an important factor. I always say there's like no shame in following the leader, and there is no shame in following the leader, but you need to understand that if you're going to do that, you have to offer some type of differentiation. You know, I use Homefront as an example. I think Homefront, I believe it or not, Homefront is actually one of my favorite games. I love it, but it doesn't really differentiate from the rest of the competitors. It's just really, they're playing follow the leader, which is fine. It sold 3 million units, right? It did over $150 million in revenue. Is it a brand? Well, I guess that's still yet to be seen. But generally, if you don't differentiate, it's really hard to become a brand. And again, there really is no shame in playing follow the leader. Sometimes that's just what you have to do. So there are instances where I think it's okay to just make a video game. First, if you just need short-term operating capital, you just need money. Yeah, go ahead and make a game. You want to experiment, maybe there's a new emerging market that's not even considered emerging yet, it's just that it's so new. Yeah, go ahead and experiment. I always recommend doing it under a different label, because I would hate for anyone to lessen their brand or create some type of confusion with the consumer. If you want to test emerging markets, short-term capitalization on fads, there are companies out there that do nothing but that, right? I think, 6-7 months ago, we finally got Osama bin Laden, right? And a week later, there was dozens upon dozens of games out there where you could actually replicate and shoot them in the head. That's okay. Educational purposes. Or if you simply don't care. There are actually people in this audience, there's people all around the world who just simply don't care. They're 100% art. They want to make their game. They want to be good at it. Then they don't really care about making brands, and that's fine. There are people out there. I sit on the board of an investment fund, and I've spoken to dozens of developers where I would just literally just throw the money at them and they just wouldn't want it because they just don't care. They just want to make games. That's their passion, and that's okay. Now, typically this is where I come up with in my presentation, but I always get questions about, well, how do you create brands and how do brands get created? And so I threw this piece in. And it's an interesting piece because it's one of the ways in which brands get created, and that is through the introduction of new technology. So pretty much this is how brands are managed today, right? Let's try this out. Hey, it worked. We're going to monetize. And then, hey, that was fun. We're going to exit the category. Tomorrow, it's going to be the same way. And that's an important factor. How brands are created and managed 50 years ago is the same as it is today. And it's going to be the same 50 years from now. And again, it's not just video games, it's entertainment, right? American Idol came out, it worked, and then everybody started copying it. And eventually people got bored. And now we're down to, I think, Simon has one called the X Factor, which ratings are very low. Clearly the category is exiting. New brands are generally created with new advancements and software and technology are introduced. And the ability to sustain that interest really has to do about I guess your ability to sustain those consumer interests, evolve the category, not hit those feature ceilings. But it's important to remember that brands are generally created when new advancements are introduced. I'm going to show this right now. Music games, right? One of the first music games that came out was Amplitude. It was actually developed by Harmonix. Why was that successful? Wasn't that successful? It was a pretty nice hit. They made some money off it. Well, they took advantage of something new, right? They used the HD sound that was in the PS2. They were one of the first to use licensed music. Then came Guitar Hero, a rock band. Why were they successful? Well, they did something new. They took advantage of a new technology, the instrument. Yeah, it wasn't that revolutionary. It was a plastic guitar, but still, it used the technology. Would Guitar Hero and Rock Band be as successful today without the instrument? Of course not. Dance games, right? EEDAR came out, introduced a dance pad. They had a great run, but eventually it fizzled out. They reached a feature ceiling. And then came Motion and Just Dance. Why was Just Dance successful? Because it took advantage of a new technology, motion controls. Motion in general, right? Why was the Wii successful? New technology. Kinect, new technology. And then, something will eventually come in the future. And again, not just video games, right? Entertainment. 3D. For those that remember the time scale, by the way, the time scale at the bottom is a relative time scale. It's not absolute. So year one could be 2001 or it could be 2008. But if you remember about 3D, about 30 years ago, they introduced the red and blue glasses, and that worked for a bit. And then Disney came along and introduced 3D at the IMAX, which was more modern day. And eventually we got to this tipping point where you were able to do this efficiently and make a profit and hit the mainstream by bringing modern day 3D. And that's when Avatar was launched. Now, I always ask this when I talk about this, I ask this at conferences, you really need to think about this. What if Avatar in 3D was launched today? Right? And all the dance 3D movies and the Piranhas 3Ds and Sharks and Disney, those already came out. Avatar launches today. Would Avatar have been as successful? And the answer is no. It probably would have sold, would have probably generated some significant box office revenues, but it wouldn't have been the best-selling movie of all times. Now ask yourself, what if Avatar wasn't in 3D? There's no 3D, it's just Avatar, and it launched back in 2009, 2010. Would it have sold as many, would it have been as successful? And the answer is no, of course not. So why did it work? It's because they were able to implement this 3D at a point where it was reaching a tipping point, use this new technology to build this brand, and that's why it worked. Some categories just seem to be able to sustain interest much longer, like MMORPGs, and I guess the theory there is that the more core your audience, the more loyal your audience, maybe the more likely you can sustain their interest. Sometimes it's not about just creating new IPs, but you can take existing IPs and kind of reborn them. Right? The Sims launched on the PC. When it first came out, it was a phenomenal hit. But eventually sales fizzled out. Then they introduced Sims on the Motion. They put motion controls in, and it became successful again. Then they took advantage of another technology, mobile. And then, of course, most recently, they took advantage of Facebook, a new platform, a new technology. And now that was successful. I think it's, at one point, it was the most played game on Facebook. Same thing with consoles, right? The only reason why shooters work on consoles today is because of a new technology. They introduced the dual analog. They made this, we finally reached a point technically where we could actually play first-person shooters on the consoles. And that's how games like Call of Duty and Medal of Honor and Halo took off, because they used a new technology. And I think Call of Duty is even a great example of how they kind of recreated themselves and propelled themselves to the success they're at today. Before Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Medal of Honor was outselling it, Halo was outselling it, but what did Call of Duty do? They realized there was a new technology coming, the Xbox 360, the PS3, that was going to introduce something new. Being able to play online, communicate with friends, have this progressive multiplayer experience. And they are the ones that did it. And it's no surprise that, of course, they continue to be the market leader. Graphics. I always like to use graphics as a great example as well. We tend to find that graphics only work or really drive sales early on in a cycle, when there's a significant jump So when I go from playing a PS2 to a PS3 game, I care about graphics. And that's why Gran Turismo was so successful, and that's why we only see one Gran Turismo every 5 years, because most people only buy it because of the graphics. But that's not sustainable, because as we get later on in the cycle, graphics really play less of a role in our purchasing decision. And a good case study is actually Fight Night Round 3. So Fight Night Round 3 came out at the launch of the Xbox 360 and the PS3. And for those that actually remember the 2005 when they were introducing the consoles, they always used the Fight Night video as kind of their poster child for high definition graphics, right? When the guy got punched in the face, you could see the wrinkles, and that drove sales. Sales were phenomenal. But then Fight Night Round 4 came out, and Fight Night Round 4, I think they call it Fight Night Championship, sold a fraction of what Fight Night Round 3 did, even though it's a better game. Why? Because graphics are good enough, right? The marginal increase in graphics is just not enough for us to drive to that game, like Rage. I like to use Rage as an example. They're a great company, they make great games. Their most recent game, very beautiful. I think Rage is a beautiful game. But we don't want that. The graphics were only marginally better, 10, 20% better. And of course, when the new systems launch, there's going to be a game that's maybe not that high in quality in terms of gameplay, but offer a phenomenal graphical experience, a huge jump from the 360 to the 720, and people are going to buy it. And that's why LA Noire, even though it sold 5 million units, it wasn't necessarily successful. Why? Because it launched so late in the cycle. For them to create that game that was so beautiful, and it wasn't a marginal increase in the graphics, it was a huge leap. It's probably one of the best looking games I've ever seen. And they sold a lot of units, but the problem was, because it was so late in the cycle, to actually do that, it cost them 6 million units to make the game, and they only sold 5. Now, of course, you can throw around the mismanagement thing, and I know that gets close to home, so I'm not going to go into that. But certainly understand that if you're going to be launching a game late in a technology cycle and you're going to use graphics as your key selling point, probably not going to work for you. Mobile graphics is the same thing, right? BlackBerry first came out with a full-color screen. Sales, if you look at mobile sales, they jumped up. HD Retina. Retina, by the way, is like the greatest marketing scheme I've ever seen, because first of all, I don't know what Retina is. It's your eye, right? But yet, Apple got a hold of that, and they say this is HD Retina graphics. You can't see a pixel. And when the iPhone launched with the Retina display, 85% of the top 50 selling games had the word Retina in their description. We saw, oh, it's Retina. But now, if you look, they don't say that anymore, because it just fades away. And of course, same thing. As technology progresses, there's going to be something, and that's why I think you look at things like Infinity Blade, and I guess really what's important to understand is that when you guys, a lot of people in here are making iPhone games, and if you want to make a beautiful game, launch it when a new iPhone launches. So this is kind of everything I've just talked about, and it's an important concept because people tend to think of cycles as the Xbox 360 launches, and that's a cycle, and it ends 8 years later. But what we are seeing in our rapidly evolving industry is that new technologies are introduced all the time, right? We don't have to wait for the start of a new cycle. There's new technologies introduced all the time, like the Kinect. And it's not hardware technology. Sometimes it's software, too. A good example is a Kingdom for Catherines, right? So Xbox in 2008 updated their dashboard. And one of the major updates was now you can use your avatars in your games. And by no coincidence, at the same time, there was a game that used that new feature. And it wasn't the greatest game. It's a game that's worth playing, but it wasn't the greatest game. But yet, it is among the top 20 selling Xbox Live games of all time. Why? Because it took advantage of a new technology, and in this case, software. So this is an important graph. This one took a lot of time for my team to create. So we went back and we looked at every single game since 2005, and we classified those games as either launching early, mid, or late in a cycle. So if you were just a standard Xbox game, early is the first 2.5 years, and then 2.5 years later is the mid, and then so on and so on. The Kinect, right? The Kinect's first year, that's early in a cycle. So we took into account all these cycles. And we find that of new IPs launching early in the cycle, 30% were successful. Successful being, by our definition, selling at least 1.8 million units or receiving a sequel. There's a couple other definitions, but they were successful. And using that same criteria, if you launched mid, only 9% were successful. And then late, 4%. So this kind of helps prove a little bit that launching late in a cycle is really, especially when it comes to a new IP, can really be bad. And that's why as developers, I think we really need to focus, especially if we're trying to build brands, is to launch early. So there's kind of wave, right? It's kind of like a wave. When new technologies are introduced, there's this period where you can exploit it, or first, I should say, establish yourself. Then you kind of have this experimentation phase. And eventually the category enters. This is just how all, it's not fads, but this is how our entertainment industry works. Nothing lasts forever. There is a type of wave. And a good example I can use is the music category. So Guitar Hero came out, they were the first, they created that technology cycle. They were first to establish themselves. And they remained the market leaders all the way to the end, even though Rock Band came out after them, after Guitar Hero established themselves, and Rock Band was a superiorly better game. I can actually always tell if you're a core gamer or if you're a casual gamer by what music product you own. Core gamers tend to own Rock Band, casual gamers tend to own Guitar Hero. And it's important to note here that you can't launch yourself late in a cycle. If the cycle's on the exit and you're trying to establish yourself, it doesn't work out. Same thing with Dance, right? Just Dance came out. It wasn't really a great game, but it was the first to use new technology to create that genre. And then Dance Central came out, which was a superiorly better game, but it didn't sell as much. And of course, we have some titles now launching again. You're launching in that exploit and exit phase, and it's just not going to work for you. So it's a very, very important concept to understand. Everything that applied yesterday applies today, and unfortunately it's going to apply tomorrow. And again, this is a 30,000-foot view. All right? The micro aspects of the industry might change for you to play and how games get made, but for the most part, how brands are created yesterday are the same today, and it's going to be the same tomorrow. And it's very, very important concept to understand. Right? When Nintendo first launched in 1985, right, it brought Contra. Right? Now that was a new brand, took advantage of new technology. Then came the Game Boy, and now we could go portable. And games like Tetris were made. Then came 3D, and then came 3D sound, upgraded graphics, online play, games like Grand Theft Auto, and now iPhone, which introduced free-to-play. So it's important to understand that new technologies always present themselves. And if you're going to be successful in this industry, long-term, short-term, you can experience a lot of success just capitalizing on fads and making video games. But if you truly, as an independent developer, want to make games that last forever, make a brand, make a footprint in this industry, you need to understand that the best time to generally launch is early in a technology cycle. I find that about 80% of successful brands share one commonality, and that is they took advantage of a new technology and software. When it was new, when it was in that establishment phase. And that's why it's important to understand the future of our industry. And I know Tony talked about this, about it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in 2015 and 16 and 17. But I guess that's why companies like EEDAR exist, to always keep our finger on the pulse. And that's why I come out to these events. I don't get paid for doing this. I come out here to talk to you guys to help at least provide some clarity on what's going to happen in the future so that you guys can be ready. Again, brands, ladies and gentlemen, they just dominate entertainment. They dominate entertainment. Right now, brands might not dominate emerging markets, but those emerging markets are emerging. Eventually, they're going to mature. And if 3 or 4 years from now, you're going to look at the top 50 selling games on iOS, and you're going to see that they're all brands. They're sequels. They're existing properties. Understand the factors that create a brand. Very important. And again, in that presentation, you'll be able to, you can download it. You just have to send a request. New technologies, for the most part, propel new brands. Again, launching late. Like if you want to use of that 4% of games that were successful launching late, I know 2 of those games was LA Noire and Homefront, which really, as we know now, LA Noire is not getting a sequel, and Homefront did okay, but it wasn't that great. be forward-looking. I understand that sometimes, as developers, especially students, it's okay to create video games. You're just trying to get your foot in the industry. All pitches need a brand plan. Whether you are pitching to a publisher or an investor, eventually you're going to need help. You need some type of funding. And I sit on a board. We get pitched games all the time. And this is probably like 30-40% of the pitches. Someone comes in and says, I got a great idea for a video game. And then I just say, get it, because I'm not in the video game business. I'm in the brand business. Now sometimes they're making video games and they don't understand they actually have a brand in their hands, and as an investor I love that because they think they're making a video game and I just get the brand rights and I win, I make all the money. I think I just hurt my business right now by calling that all the time. Again, 3 E's: establish, exploit, exit. Early is always better. Again, there's no shame in following the leader. Understand cycles. Right? Cycles present themselves all the time. We know the iPhone 5 is coming out next year. We know the iPad 3 is coming out in a year and a half. If you're going to launch a cool new product, do it then. Do it then and take advantage of whatever new technology. And that, of course, does mean you have to work closely with companies like Apple, and which is why publishers are still pretty relevant and important because they have those connections. Right? It's no secret that Epic Games, knew about the iPad 4S and the new iPads and the new iPhones coming out well in advance, so they can adapt and make Infinity Ward take advantage of those new technologies. I guess with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. And I guess do we do Q&A? So there's a link on there. If you guys actually want a copy of my presentation, and the presentation is very good, especially when you use it internally. This is the website there, edar.com/contact ASPX. Just enter your name, email address, and hey, maybe say a few kind words. That actually helps. And I'll be sure when I get back to America on Thursday and Friday to send out the presentations to all of you. Or you can just go to edar.com. If you forget the address, edar.com, there's a place where you can contact us.
So before we go to questions, please thank Jesse Divnich.
Okay.
Questions? Strength and good. Don't take them to blame.
Oh, that's right. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Hey Jesse, I saw that you put up free to play on your little, cyclical graph of icons of new emerging technologies or things that have changed the business shifts. Do you see the 3 E's applying to that? Do you think we'll see a gradual, is the interest in free-to-play, or I guess the excitement about free-to-play dropping off, or will that sustain? I guess, do the 3 E's apply to the pricing model?
That's actually a great question. So one thing I've been observing a lot lately is social markets, the Facebook markets, which generally is known as the free-to-play market, even though it's probably a lot better than the iPhone. What we are finding is that we are in that maturity phase for free-to-play. We're finding that people are just getting bored of time management. So this idea of like Farmville and Sim Social, where you have to buy credits and you have energy that depletes. We're actually finding that people are less engaged now than they were before. If you actually look, it took Farmville, I believe, 860 days to reach its peak. And then Cityville came out and that took, I think, 180 days. Sim Social reached its peak within 40 days. Mafia Wars hit its peak within 2 weeks. So I think we are beginning to see that the model does have to evolve a little bit better. As it applies to iPhone, I have to think of some examples, but when certainly as it applies to social, this whole idea of time management, that's the cycle, right? That's the new genre. I think that's going away. That has to evolve somehow. Adventure World, I think Adventure World peaked within 2 months, not even 2 months, I think it was a month and a half. So as it applies to mobile, I think free-to-play is a business model. And how we capitalize on that model, it will expand. I don't think it's necessarily, because it's a business model, it doesn't really have this type of a wave. It is a wave, but it's going to be much more sustained and much longer, much elongated. But how you capitalize on your consumers through free-to-play will certainly change. I mean, I think right now it's all about buying coins, and I think that works, and that's new. So that's probably going to last 4 or 5 years, but I think eventually consumers do get bored of it and get tired of just buying coin packs. So that we'll have to be something there to replace that. Go ahead.
Zynga did well publishing the existing idea, or is something else involved in their rise?
Zynga became successful for one reason, and it was because the social gaming market was hitting a critical mass, a tipping point. And they were there. They were the ones there to exploit it. Yeah, they were not original in any way. But again, to the average consumer who plays Farmville, they think that Farmville started this all. So I think that's the reason why Farmville, and I don't know if they'll be able to sustain that. I mean, now they have so much money they can buy creativity, they can retain creativity and acquire creativity. But right now, I do have some concerns. I'm not going to lie. I have some grave concerns for Zynga. I think this quarter they posted their highest revenue ever, which was like $320 million for the quarter. I don't know if they're going to be able to sustain that, quite honestly. Because their latest game, Mafia Wars, is a piece of crap game. It's still the same time-based management game. So I do think they need to evolve. Okay. Well, even when you're self-publishing, you still have a pulse in the market. I mean, we know that a year from now the new iPhone's going to launch. I don't have inside information, just that's how Apple works. They're going to launch a new iPhone. We know that the Xbox 360 is probably going to launch, or 720 is probably going to launch in 2013, 2014. So that's how you anticipate that. But as a self-publisher, an independent publisher, or an independent developer, you don't necessarily have those resources to wait. Even though you know that a new technology is coming out, you need the money now. And I think that's where publishers and investors become a very key critical role. And I know as independent developers, we hate the idea of working with publishers, and we hate the idea of investors. Why would you want to work with people like me? I just want money, right? I want to take your money. But I want you to make money as well. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, because I do talk to a lot of independent developers. And the biggest thing is like they come into the room just instantly hating us because they know that we want a piece of their pie, but they don't understand that we're going to give you the money. If you want to wait and perfect your game and wait till the iPhone 5 comes out, we're going to give you money to do that. Yeah, we're going to take some off the top. We're going to take 50%, but you're still going to be part of a successful brand. Very, very few companies, as markets mature, very few independent developers are able to break out. Yeah, Rovio was able to do it, but that was in an emerging, when the market was emerging.
I was just curious, like, say for example, a company wants to make a game for the Gen X software. Would Microsoft, like the publisher did Microsoft find out what the hardware and the console is, figure out what they're paying for the hardware restrictions and graphics and games?
So,
or is that something that is not against that whole problem?
So it's a good question. I mean, do publishers know in advance what the consoles are going to look like? Oh yeah, they do. I mean, publishers know right now what the Xbox 720 is capable of and what the PS4 is capable of. I mean, nothing's set in stone, but they have a general idea of what the capabilities are going to be and what new technologies. And again, that's why it's always best to work with a publisher if you're making into that type of game. In the corner over here. Yeah.
Actually, one question I've got is like tons and tons of people here are indies.
Yeah.
And to them, the most important brand is actually their own name. Like, what advice do you have for an independent developer who's starting to create their own brand and
So if the brand is yourself, and I can speak a lot to that because that's what I'm trying to do is build Jesse Divnich up as a brand. And it's about engaging the community. You have to put a lot of free work engaging communities, writing reports, even if it's writing articles online, coming to conferences, right? Maybe you release a game that's just a video game, but you've done something that no one's ever done before. Maybe it's not commercially successful, but it's just a very fun game. And maybe that'll get you to the point where you can start talking on stage and talking to people and building that brand. Like people like Jonathan Blow, right? That's something that's a route he took. But understand that, you know, there's tens of thousands of independent developers, but only the top 1% rise to the top. And it requires a lot of work and certainly a lot of sacrifice. But certainly being vocal, just being in the forums, you know, don't hide behind a username, hide behind use your real name. And be vocal, engage with the community, become respected. And it's like steps. It's just steps to the top. It's not like you're going to wake up one day and all of a sudden you are Jonathan Blow or you're Ted Price. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice. I know for myself, to get where I was at today. I had, for the first 3 years I worked in this industry, I worked for free. Like, I made levels for Counter-Strike and I made levels for Half-Life. I think when Half-Life, or when Valve actually acquired Counter-Strike, I got paid $250, which at the time I was like, wow, that's huge. But it's all about the steps. You really have to lay out a plan. I hate the idea of saying you have to have a 5-year plan, but you do have to have some type of steps to walk up. Yep.
I wanted to kind of inquire about when a dev company goes into like market specialization. So, for example, there's a company that just focuses on making train simulation software, or a company that focuses, like Tripwire, on hardcore FPS games that are kind of just specifically for PC. In relation to that kind of 3E cycle and just in general the kind of rules that you've set out, what's the kind of difference between the standard and dev companies that kind of specialize in a very specific niche?
So if you're focusing on a very specialized market, I mean, you can be successful with train simulators, which I think they actually just shut down their studios that do train simulators. As long as you know going in that there is a limit, there is a limit to what you can sell. And a good example I actually use is Mass Effect. I don't know if the person who spoke yesterday is still here, but a Mass Effect's never going to be a 6 million unit selling game, right? It's never going to be a 5 million unit selling. It's going to do what it does because it targets a very niche market of consumers who are looking to enjoy that product. As long as you go in knowing that, then you're going to tailor your development and tailor your marketing and what you do to that. And a good example of someone that tried to break that was BioShock. I thought BioShock 2 was a great game. But what did they try to do? They took a great single-player experience. Like, BioShock is a great single-player experience. And they said, okay, we did 4 million units. I think we can do 6. How do we do that? We're going to add multiplayer. And of course, what we find out is, no, that doesn't work. You're dealing with a small niche consumer who only wants to play great first-person shooters in a single-player environment. Trying to expand beyond that can often lead to difficulty. I know Mass Effect is I think, putting in multiplayer. They're doing something. I wish them the best of luck, but certainly understand that it's very difficult. It's very difficult, but the big rule of thumb there is just understanding the market you're trying to target. One more question? Who's got a tough question? Right here? Stump me. Come on, stump me.
Maybe I want to skip on this one. On one of your last slides, you wrapping up very quickly. You talking about getting into the establishment phase of that art, and you said don't expect to become a true IP. I was wondering what that meant.
Well, if you launch during the establishment phase, no, you can become a true new IP or an existing property. It's when you launch late. When the category is on the exit, and you try to do something, and you try to ride that wave while it's in the exit category, then you generally don't become an existing property. You're really just capitalizing on an existing market. Like the examples with Guitar Hero and Just Dance, we see copycats trying to come in 2-3 years afterwards, where clearly the market's in decline. And yeah, they might make money. Like, you might make money doing that, right? As long as you know in advance that you're never going to become a true brand. Very, very few games that launch late in the cycle end up becoming successful. There's only a few that I can think of, but one was actually God of War. And LA Noire and Homefront, but I don't know if you really call those a success. That wasn't a tough question. Can I get one more? One more question. Okay. You know what? I'm going to pick Josh over there.
Speaking of, say, some markets are eroding, how do you know if the market, what indicators can you use to know if the market's eroding or just a flop?
You asked the toughest question. That's actually a really tough question. Well, coffee, everybody, if you guys want to go have coffee. But that's the beauty of this industry. Like, when you launch in emerging markets, there is a risk, right? Like, right now, a new emerging market is playing games on your TV through specialized remote control. Does that become a new emerging market and mature and become successful? It's a risk. You don't know. And as independent developers, that's why I always say work with publishers and work with investors, because we're willing to bear some of that risk. No, you don't know. And when the iPhone first launched, and there was people that are dedicating themselves to the iPhone, there was a good possibility that that whole market could have flopped, and it could have bankrupted a lot of people. But that is the risk you take. I mean, this is a risk-reward assessment here. If you want to become the next Angry Birds or next Fruit Ninja or Joyride or what have you, you got to understand there are some risks involved. If you want to be risk-free, then just follow the leader and copy everybody, and that's fine. You'll never really amount to anything successful, but you can make a good living. All right, guys. Thank you guys very much.